How's my audio? Can everyone hear? Good? All right, awesome. So my name's Alex Shipp. I am the head of business development at Offshift. Before I get into any of the presentation here, I want to thank everyone because I know we're almost at the end here of the event. And I'm sure everyone's tired. There have been all sorts of satellite events. Everyone's been at late night parties and everything. So I'm going to do my best to make it as entertaining and worth your time as possible. To start, I want to ask, has anyone seen this word before? No one in the whole audience. OK, well, you're in the right place then. Good. I need to get started. So PriFi, as I'm sure many people here can probably imagine, stands for Private Decentralized Finance, private DeFi. Right? So I'm going to talk about privacy. There have been a number of talks already about privacy on the privacy track that have spoken about privacy through the lens of humanitarianism. I'm going to talk about privacy as it relates to systems of exchange and the way in which it promotes healthy economic prosperity and function. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background into money and credit. Money emerges naturally in any sort of civilization, any sort of society, to facilitate trade and commerce. It's superior to bartering, and it allows society to expand. It allows society to grow. It allows people to store value across time and space, and it allows us all to conduct exchange with less friction. Now, credit also emerges organically, and it emerges on top of money. And credit could be considered any form, any sort of receipt that can be at some point in some way exchanged directly for money. It's most commonly we consider gold being money, and we consider paper, banknotes, in some ways fiat currency even, being a form of credit. And so for the longest time, in the crypto space, we talk about this sort of crisis of sound money. We talk about this big problem we have where we no longer have sound money in our world, and that crypto offers some form of sound money that can replace our faulty systems and produce something that's more equitable, more fair, and that can ensure property ownership through the lens of money. Right? And it's interesting because credit always emerges organically, in fact, in much the same way that money does. And that's not something that we talk about a lot because in the crypto space, we think about credit, in particular, we think about fiat currency as some sort of perversion of money, where fiat is sort of something that ruined the gold standard. It ruined a sort of scarce money. But in fact, credit always emerges because it allows us to facilitate transaction, it allows us to facilitate exchange more efficiently, and it allows us to do so more in a more versatile fashion. So while money creates this sort of sound foundation for our civilization, which we can store value across time and space, credit is this thin laminate, this thin flexible laminate across the top where we can exchange that value more efficiently. Because the qualities, the intrinsic qualities of money, in particular gold, which allow it to be scarce, divisible, portable, etc., necessarily take away from and detract from its ability to serve as a superlative medium of exchange. In the case of gold, its physical substance makes it or requires some sort of energy output in order to exchange it, and that becomes costly. It prevents microtransactions, and as society becomes more sophisticated, there are also challenges involving derivative instruments which are needed to help businesses function more stably in volatile environments. There are also different forms of loans. There are also different forms of financial instrumentation that gold could not support alone, and even today, gold in derivatives markets is cash settled, because it's simply infeasible for us to continue growing. These perpetual evolutionary algorithms that are constantly advancing our civilizations, our systems, and ourselves require more efficient and more versatile forms of exchange. And so I posit, and I'm here to talk a little bit about how credit, not necessarily fiat currency through the lens that we normally look at it, but that credit is an inevitable, organic, and emergent phenomenon which cannot simply be fixed by sound money, because sound money is only a part of the solution. Okay, so here we have this little graphic to say the car is 10 ounces of gold, but we pay in useless pieces of paper, and we can also pay with useless plastic cards if we wish. Right? And it allows for far more economic prosperity on the whole. It allows for a broader diversity of labor. It allows for technological innovation in so many ways. The challenge is that credit issuance is opaque and our systems of credit issuance are very much centralized. Whether that begins in the form of some very advanced and very wealthy network of financial institutions, or whether it ends up what we have today with central banks and a network of supranational financial institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, et cetera, the BIS, that are connected to central banks and that are all connected to governments, they all have the power to issue credit, or in essence, create wealth and extract wealth from the population. We all know this narrative. We're all very familiar with it. But we tend to blame a lack of sound money, when really what we have is a conundrum of sound credit. In other words, this natural and emergent system of credit, which comes and is sort of layered on top of money, is centralized, and therefore it's very easily exploited and exposed. So that is the number one thing that I want to emphasize here. Now, finally, step into cryptocurrency a little bit. Bitcoin and arguably Ethereum, you could say Monero, you could say a lot of these sort of blockchain 1.0 applications have allowed us to form different sorts of very, very sound money because they are decentralized and inherently scarce. Now, the challenge, of course, is that the very qualities that make them scarce, that make them sound, inherently and necessarily prevent them from being exchanged as efficiently as maybe some other means. And in particular, that would be in the case of Bitcoin, the difficulty level and the hashing algorithm. We all know this. And so credit naturally emerges again. No matter how you slice, no matter how you cut it, if there's a sound money, there's going to be a system of credit on top of it. There's going to be this laminate. And so the question is, how can we build this sort of system? And the answer, most of the people in the room know, is that we have now DeFi, which is super, super exciting. And we already see that Bitcoin, wrapped Bitcoin, has migrated over to a number of different DeFi applications. Because on Ethereum, using DeFi, transactions are far more efficient. And there's this really versatile array of things we can do, from NFTs and all sorts of different lending and borrowing, and there's staking, and there are a lot of great interest rates and yields and all sorts of different things. And so DeFi is such a profound innovation. It sort of offers us the opportunity for the first time to resolve this quintessential challenge that has plagued humanity for the longest time. We have issues with sound money, certainly. For example, the most prominent being maybe in a village a very long time ago, millennia ago, where seashells might have been used in the mountains as a form of money, and you could have some other tribe or group of people that takes those seashells and brings them into the village and extracts all the wealth by exposing the money as being unsound, or at least only sound in a regional sense. But gold, on the other hand, and Bitcoin gold certainly has not been exposed or exploited as being unscarce or unsound. What we have, again, is this really challenging issue where credit is inherently unsound because it's inherently centralized, and no humans seem to be able to act responsibly with the power to control its issuance. Now, here's the challenge. Because if it were that simple, and I wish it was, that would be the end of my presentation, and I would just say, thanks for your time, I'm Alex, and I have no job. But in fact, the reality is that we are building this system of decentralized credit, these DeFi applications, in the virtual domain. And the virtual domain is very different from the physical domain, where, say, gold would exist. And so we have one additional layer, one additional challenge, which plagues us, because in the internet, all of our data can be harvested, extracted, it can be compiled and concentrated, and then it can be used through predictive analytics to profile population demographics to understand us, the way we behave, and then, of course, to manipulate and shift the way we behave as any authoritarian entity or any marketing agency or any powerful corporation see fit. And so the challenge there is one that is certainly humanitarian, and there have been a number of great talks already that have talked about, again, the humanitarian implications of surveillance capitalism and authoritarian measures that are being implemented by a number of different governments and supranational agencies, regulatory agencies, et cetera. But I'm not here to talk so much about that. Certainly, I and everyone who I work with at Offshift, and probably many people at this conference, would agree that privacy, the right to be alone with yourself when you transact, when you live, when you socialize, when you use the internet, and in real life, is something that we're all born with. It's an inalienable fundamental right. However, I'm going to, again, address privacy through the lens of what it provides for the public good via systems of exchange, because that really is the argument of the authoritarian agencies and the governments and everyone that wants to surveil, which is that ultimately it provides for the public good by protecting us. So, privacy is the key piece that protects rehypothecation. It prevents the rehypothecation of our data, which is most certainly a form of wealth. And I have to imagine that most people here have seen the 2018 article from The Economist where they talk about data being the most valuable commodity now in the world, more so than even oil. And so when we have any new form of wealth, any new asset class that sort of emerges or arises and becomes prominent, the rehypothecation is what breaks down that fundamental ability we have to own private property and will ultimately result in the dissolution, the destruction of our economic and social fabric, whether that takes place in the form of unsound money, unsound credit, or the extraction and unwarranted theft of our data. This can be systemic through inflation, through rehypothecation. It could also be through the form of confiscation that's happened with gold, but the result is the same. Okay. So now to look through this sort of 12-year history, I believe 12 years, of blockchain that we have these blockchain 1.0 use cases where we have a decentralized form of money. We have sound money. And then we have blockchain 2.0, which is these brilliant DeFi applications that are popping up on Ethereum, other EVM chains, and all over the place. And then we have 3.0, which is this really brilliant and important piece where we infuse privacy into the mix so that not only do we have decentralized systems for the formation and exchange of credit instruments, but we also have rehypothecation-proof credit and rehypothecation-proof data because we own it. So privacy is so important because privacy is scarcity in the virtual domain, and it certainly seems like that's the direction we're all moving in at this point, into the virtual domain. Okay, so I'm now going to finally get to the main topic here, which is PriFi. And what PriFi is, private decentralized finance, should now be very apparent and very important to anyone in the room. A true bona fide, a truly sound application of PriFi should have all three of these qualities. It's super, super important. As sort of a project that we like to say that we're pioneering PriFi, or that we're sort of one of the first figures in the space, it's really important to set a standard at the outset so that things don't become centralized, don't become compromised. And we sort of see that on Ethereum when we don't really define what a good, sound, Turing-complete chain is that's decentralized. We see, I'm not going to name names, but we see all sorts of ETH clones popping up that aren't actually decentralized, that can compete with Ethereum because the costs are lower, but they've already given up on the decentralization piece, which was the most important in the first place. So what a PriFi, a bona fide PriFi application should be, is it should be obviously filled with decentralized applications of finance, uncompromising. Obviously, they should be fully decentralized, no exceptions. They should confer unequivocal privacy. There should be no loopholes or exceptions there either. And the last piece, which is especially important, is that they should operate fully on-chain. That means on Ethereum, and that means layer 1. Okay? And why on-chain? Because that last piece is really challenging, and it really knocks a lot of projects out of the mix. So I want to just touch on that here, because it is very important. So why on-chain? Because on-chain is where it's most decentralized, it's most accessible to established, in particular on Ethereum, to the established and most robust communities in the space, and of course it's going to be censorship resistant as a result. The challenge is that so many projects are very tempted to simply build on another chain, to build elsewhere, to build their own. And it is, I'll get into that a little bit later, but there are a lot of technical challenges involved with building privacy-centric applications on Ethereum. But regardless, the challenges that privacy faces are that it isn't that accessible for people. And the space looked, by people, I mean users. And in fact, I mean typical users. And probably not the people at this conference, but the mass crypto market that actually wants to use this stuff, but isn't an expert, isn't flying to Paris to learn about it. The challenge is that in 2016, 2017, the blockchain space looked very different, where there were predominantly blockchain 1.0 applications. You could send, you could exchange and store value with Bitcoin, or you could transact and store value with Monero and maintain your privacy. That was pretty cool, and that was a pretty nice deal. You're on a separate blockchain, but you're not really missing out. The challenge is that now, in 2021, the crypto landscape looks entirely different. Because users don't just want to store a token or a coin and then send it to their friend and then take it back. They want to stake it, they want to earn huge returns, they want to buy meme tokens, stake that, earn pineapple tokens, mint a rare NFT, sell it auction style at OpenSea, get that back and keep staking and get synthetics and so on and so on. And so now, participating in the privacy landscape, in particular privacy coins, is kind of like going to an amusement park and being told that you're not tall enough to go on any of the rides, and you kind of just sit off on a bench off to the side, and you get to tell yourself that you're maintaining your privacy. It's not really a great deal, especially because of how lucrative DeFi can be at times. not investment advice. But the point is that in order to bring privacy back on stage, because at this stage, it's certainly been relegated to the back burner of cryptographic innovation and even cryptographic consideration, because as the capital and interest of the mass crypto market have shifted to DeFi, elite developer teams and venture capital resources have followed in suit. And privacy is very much on the back burner. And unfortunately, in order to bring it back on stage, we really need to bring it back on chain. We have to make it more accessible. We have to make it almost as cheap as any alternative that's public. And it has to be simple, user-friendly, a couple clicks away. It has to be an accessory of sorts, something, a feature that can be augmented, that can be adapted very easily onto, whether it's a protocol or a token or whatever it is, it's something that the user can say, I feel like being private today, without having to use Tor or figure out what Onion is or learn about all sorts of different separate blockchains. It's too much work. So here are all of the live PriFi platforms today. The list is a little bit shorter than you'd like, given how impactful and promising these technologies are. You'd like to see a little bit more going on. Now, I'm not going to just have everyone stare at a blank screen the whole time, so I want to zoom out, and I want to take a look at a lot of the projects that are on the fringe, a lot of different platforms, a lot of different ideas that are satisfying some of these conditions that contain some of the characteristics of a bona fide PriFi platform, but aren't fully there. And it's not to insult any project, it's not to say that anything isn't good. There are so many different sorts of privacy-centric applications and technologies out there, but nothing's really hitting the mark, and I'll elaborate on that. But I first want to go in depth here into sort of taking a look at everything. So this is probably the sickest infographic I've ever seen in crypto. Our designer is awesome. Here you can see we have these sort of 4 components. You can take a picture if you want. And you could also, just by the way, if you have any other project, you could fit almost anything onto this chart. You know, and again, there's nowhere bad that you don't want to be. Except for meme coins, shit coins, and rugs, you're pretty good anywhere on the chart. And so it's just to take a look at these qualities. Does it have a basis in decentralized money? Is it private? Does it contain financial DeFi apps? And is it fully on-chain on layer 1? So I don't have time to go through all of these pieces, but I would like to talk about a few of them at least, and I've highlighted a few of them that we can sort of go into here. When you look at PriFi through this lens and you look at some of the projects that are sort of on the fringe, that are in different spaces, you'll start to notice that, yeah, you really need to be dead center there and you need to satisfy all of these conditions. So the first one here is number 5, which is right there in the upper right, which is privacy coins. And that's quite an appropriate term at this point, because again, they just allow for the storage and the transaction of wealth. And you can do it privately. And of course, over here you see Monero, Zcash, private chain. These are the most prominent privacy coins. And they're excellent at what they do. But again, the trade-offs to using them being outside the ecosystem, even though many of them have very robust and powerful consensus mechanisms, and some of them even, especially Monero, has sort of championed this idea that privacy confers fungibility to units of exchange, to money in the digital space, and therefore it may even be more sound money than Bitcoin, maybe more sound money than Ethereum. That's fine, but it's not going to help us with credit. And so privacy coins kind of serve in an odd way as havens. In the event of some kind of very predictable economic or financial crisis, they're a good place to hide, to store wealth. But they aren't going to help us to systemically prevent those kinds of collapses from happening, because there's no credit solution there. And so from there, the next logical move is to number 4, up at the top there, which is your off-chain private DeFi. These guys are getting pretty close, because they're saying, let's build our own standalone blockchain that confers privacy as, for the most part, a solitary value proposition. It's an exciting idea. And we can build our blockchain in a way that's conducive to privacy-centric applications. We don't have to deal with any of the challenges of building on an established public blockchain that was built to be Turing complete and obviously public by definition. So some of these projects, and again, Secret Network is at the forefront, and certainly as someone in the privacy space, I'm not here to disparage any projects. A lot of these guys are very interesting in what they're doing, and they're picking up a lot of steam. That being said, building your own separate blockchain is a very tall order. as is competing with the established network effects of Ethereum and arguably Polkadot, and especially just in general competing with the established network effects of EVM chains. And so it's almost a nice parallel is you kind of throw a crazy house party and you wake up the next morning and it's a total mess and the rug is disgusting and you decide, let's just build a new house, this is going to be terrible. It might work, and you could even build that house in a way that would be with marble floors and it'll be easier to clean the next time you have a party. But in any event, regardless, you're always going to deal with the problem that when you start to actually build the house, you have to feed in the electric wiring and the internet and the plumbing and so many other things. You're going to realize that it's quite an intricate and difficult task. And similar thing takes place when we talk about building a separate blockchain that may be very well designed for privacy, but how are you going to build a robust and battle-tested consensus? Are you going to be able to put together a global, fully decentralized body of nodes and very well-populated body of nodes? And then, of course, can you bring in the developer teams? Can you get a bunch of developers, and you're probably going to have to poach them from the Ethereum community at this point. There aren't that many blockchain developers in the world. It's going to become very challenging. And so it's not to insult any of these projects. It's very tempting for someone that's a little bit ahead of themselves to label that ghost chain shitfire or something along those lines. But really, Ethereum was just an idea at one point as well. And so to these projects that are building their own privacy-centric financial universes from the ground up, we simply say power to them. Perhaps one day, and we can certainly expect that there will be many competitors both in the privacy and in the protocol layer space for many years to come as the space becomes more mainstream. But they certainly don't meet the needs for PriFi in the immediate present, because again, without an established consensus mechanism and a really decentralized body of nodes and a lot of trade-offs going between chains, it's not going to be as user-friendly or as accessible as we want it to be. Next, I want to talk about 8, which is mixers and tumblers. Tornado Cash could also be in here. They're a little bit more sophisticated because of the way they use contracts, as opposed to Miximus and Mobius. But mixers, for anyone who's not familiar, sort of cycle your funds through a series of addresses. And so they can sort of help you to become more anonymous by dissociating those funds from your original addresses and some of the transactions you conducted earlier. It's a nice Band-Aid solution, and certainly for the time being, it's useful to many people. But it's certainly not a PriFi solution. It's certainly not a sustainable solution, and it doesn't involve any inherently private assets. So it's going to ultimately disincentivize spending. It's going to ultimately disincentivize users from engaging DeFi applications unless they absolutely need to, because there's a cost, especially with gas fees where they are, there's a cost involved with using the Tornado Cash application or Miximus or Mobius or whatever it is. And anytime you go back to transact, you're kind of making yourself public again. So that leads us to the last one, which is layer 2 private DeFi. So this is really the most fascinating, the most interesting. There have actually been a couple projects. I believe one Anonoma, I believe Hopper also presented. There were a couple that are sort of doing different privacy-centric things on Ethereum, and they're doing them on layer 2s. Which means that they sort of have their own platform above the layer 1 where they conduct transactions or obfuscation. The number one that I really want to talk about is Aztec Protocol. They sort of conceived the concept of an on-chain confidential token standard. I believe it was EIP 1715, where they talked about building some sort of very foundational, very basic PriFi sort of idea on Ethereum. They elected to use zkSNARKS with an N, as opposed to using one of the other zk, zero-knowledge proof implementations. And so their solution involves some semblance of a trusted setup. They did do it very well. They did it actually not too long ago, I believe. But in any event, all of their obfuscation and the privacy application takes place in a zk rollup. So again, it's not fully on layer 1. Is it a really sound idea? Yeah, there are a lot of these. Again, the PriFi, the standard is all layer 1. Can we do it fully on layer 1 without resorting to any solution that could be inherently require a trusted setup, that could require any element of centralization or anything of that nature? So here there are quite a number of projects that are doing quite a lot of things, and there's no one that's really launched a fully complete PriFi application. We're doing that. I want to talk a little bit about why none of these exist. Because you would think, why not just do it? Why not just put one on layer 1? And there are some significant technical challenges involved. In particular, it's simply that Ethereum was built and designed to be Turing complete, not private. And so anyone who's trying to put privacy-centric applications on top of Ethereum is dealing with a very tedious and challenging, it's quite a tall order. And of course, developer resources are, at this point, quite difficult to come by. So here's what it boils down to. Transaction models. Ethereum as most people should probably be familiar, uses what's called an account-based transaction model, whereas the alternative generally, or the second most prominent in the space, is something called the UTXO model, an unspent transaction output model. Bitcoin is most famous for using the UTXO model, and Ethereum is most famous for using the account-based model. Simply put, global states exist on Ethereum in the protocol layer. They exist fundamentally. And so a concept like an account balance, an actual user or someone that has an actual account where they hold tokens exists in the protocol. Whereas in a UTXO model like Bitcoin, no such thing exists. UTXOs, in other words, in layman's terms, coins or tokens, coins in the case of Bitcoin, are simply sent from one cryptographic address to another on the ledger, and concepts such as account balances are handled by higher levels of abstraction, like wallet applications, block explorers, and other things, which is to say that they don't really exist. On Bitcoin, you don't really have a wallet. You don't really have an account. You're just accessing some sort of unspent transaction output. And every time you try to send a transaction, you're just having a node or a series of nodes query the entire history of the blockchain for all of the previous transactions that have been made to and from your particular wallet address. The benefits here of, I'll go to the next slide, the benefits here of a UTXO model is that they're very conducive to privacy-centric applications. You'll probably end up using something like ring signatures or zk proofs, zero-knowledge proofs, but either way, if you can just obstruct, if you can obscure that information, the transaction itself, everything that's abstracted at higher layers afterwards by wallets, all sorts of account balances, are going to be totally hidden, are going to disappear. Whereas in an account-based system, it's a very different story, because the account exists in the protocol layer, so you can't merely obstruct transactions. And so if you do that, you're going to run into a lot more problems if you want to build a privacy-centric application on Ethereum. So here's the thing. Here's where it gets a bit interesting, is that, oh, it says right there, never mind. Monero and Mimblewimble, both, who built their own privacy-centric standalone blockchains, decided to use UTXO implementations, UTXO transaction models. It should come really as no surprise. Whereas Ethereum's, which is obviously going to be more beneficial to smart contracts and DeFi applications, applications which require state saving, use an account-based model. So the question is, what kind of technical solution can we develop? What can we do in order to create some kind of fully private application that enables the exchange of credit instruments that is fully decentralized layer 1 on Ethereum? None yet really exist. So here's what we're doing. We're building directly on Ethereum's account-based transaction model, which means it's fully layer 1, totally on-chain. There are, of course, going to be some comments about gas fees, about the expense and how that's managed, and that's definitely for the scalability track, although there's plenty I could say on that. The second piece is we exchange our privacy-centric derivatives. We have a token, our native tokens XFT. You can burn that and shift into this sort of proprietary line of private synthetics. And all of these are exchanged between addresses on Ethereum in the form of cryptographic commitments. So we're not sacrificing any of that programmability that Ethereum can offers, and we're also not shifting to a layer 2 in order to avoid the challenges involved with the account-based model. We're implementing and exchanging these cryptographic commitments in a UTXO model. So we call our model, our transaction model, a UTXO account-based hybrid, where the cryptographic commitments are exchanged between accounts in the form of UTXOs. So to simply obscure those transactions, to simply obscure the information, what kind of synthetic it is, what it's pegged to, and the number of tokens that are being sent, we call them zkAssets because they use bulletproof zk proofs. All of that information is hidden, and there's no worry, there's no issue with the account balances whatsoever. So in that sense, it is a fully bona fide PriFi application. Again, we employ bulletproof zk proofs because unlike SNARKs, they do not require any sort of trusted setup, and we can deploy this, again, fully on-chain on layer 1, like a broken record. Okay, so to tie everything together, we do not have in any way whatsoever a crisis of sound money, at least not since the emergence of gold as a monetary medium and a global standard. What we have now is a challenge where we continue to cycle through really toxic centralized systems of credit issuance that serve a select few individuals and organizations at the expense of the rest of the population and compromise our ability to own private property. we have a conundrum of sound credit because our credit instruments aren't being exchanged in decentralized fashion and therefore are not sound. Now that we have some sort of ecosystem of DeFi applications on Ethereum, we have a very profound and exciting opportunity for the first time to build a system of sound credit on top of sound money. But again, in the virtual domain, we have issues with the rehypothecation not of money or credit, but of data, which of course will be and is rapidly becoming one of the foremost sources of wealth, the #1 commodity in the world. And so privacy is the key element that keeps virtual economies in check, that keeps data scarce, that allows for private property ownership in the virtual domain, and really is the solution that allows our DeFi applications to play the role that we want them to. So as it says here, privacy without DeFi is extremely boring. All that we can do is hold a coin. That's really it at the end of the day, which serves some functions. But DeFi without privacy is predatory. It doesn't fully resolve the problem of rehypothecation. So PriFi is sort of, we present it as the way forward. We're pioneering it. And so anyone can come check us out. Here's a nice little graphic to tie things together as well. The car is 1F. Do you take cryptographic commitments as well, especially if they employ Bulletproof zkProofs? Haha. Obviously, just want to mention, not price commentary, not speculation about the value of one Ethereum, not saying you're going to be able to buy a car with one, not investment advice whatsoever. Need to make sure I'm clear on that disclaimer. OK, so to conclude, here's where you can find us. Here's our website, offshift.io. For anyone who thought, wow, I really wish that had been more technical, that did not satisfy my technical appetite, I wanted to get way more deep, we published a 30-something page yellow paper recently. It has all the cryptography and mathematics you could ask for. You can get into the Peterson commitments and the range proofs and everything involved in our Bulletproof zkProof implementation. If you want to, you can also check out, we have our decentralized Git on GitLab because GitHub is centralized, so we're very, very committed to the ethos of decentralization. You can check all of our code on GitLab if you want to dive in. And sort of what I want to emphasize here, again, and if you're not super technical, find us on Twitter, find us on Telegram. We have a dedicated Discord. We do monthly AMAs. You can see my face again if you want every month. We have biweekly development updates. So although we're committed to privacy at the individual level, everyone on the team is anonymous except me. I don't even know who they are. But we're very committed to transparency in the development process. And so there's a ton of information out there. In particular, before I close, I want to mention that anyone that's interested here should definitely reach out and contact. Everyone's anonymous but friendly. And the reason I mention that is because we're sort of starting what we see as a PriFi ecosystem. It's an interoperable suite of decentralized, inherently private layer 1 applications that allow for all the things you do publicly with DeFi applications. We're just building that on-ramp from XFT, our native token, into these private synthetics. But we want to build DEXs where they can be exchanged seamlessly while being fully private, that integrate our zkAssets into decentralized borrowing and lending pools, the formation and exchange of insurance products, private NFTs, and all sorts of different staking models and different applications, derivatives instruments, etc. And so if you find this interesting, we plan to be launching our mainnet in 6, maybe 7 months, very, very early Q1 2022. If this is something that interests you, get familiar with our code base, reach out, read our yellow paper. We did another feasibility study which was highly technical. Check out our white paper or pitch deck. And if you want to contribute or you want to build some sort of companion application in our PriFi ecosystem, we're certainly open to lending a hand and giving any support or resources that you may need. That being said, I just want to thank everyone, especially F France, for organizing the whole thing during a time when it was not easy to organize an event. And again, everyone who sort of stayed around here despite it being super late. So, merci beaucoup. I think, oh yeah. We have like 7 minutes for questions, so anyone that wants to can certainly go.
Hey, so great talk, really interesting. Something that I wonder about with private DeFi is how do people trust you? How do your users get to trust you? Because if you're an anon team, there is the risk of a rug. With all the food coins that came out in DeFi summer, sort of half of them were rugs. We're seeing it more on some of the new sidechains like Polygon, Binance. A lot of those projects are anonymous and then rug. There are a few that are anonymous and have stayed the course. So how do you promote trustworthiness with an anon team?
That's a really good question, especially in the privacy space. Yeah, we could have called ourselves Baguette Coin, I guess, but it's a good thing we chose Offshift instead. I mean, first of all, again, as I sort of emphasized that everyone's anonymous except me, so at least we have me. At least I'm here. I'm showing face. I'm real. I'm not going to rug you guys. But the thing is that, again, it's this careful balance between, there's that famous Glenn Greenwald quote, something along the lines of, transparency is for people in public office and positions of public power, and privacy is for everyone else. And so as individuals behind the project, it certainly makes sense and it's totally valid for people to choose to be anonymous. But again, there has to be, in the sense that we are figures and that they are figures producing a platform for public use, a private platform for public use, is that we have to offer as much transparency as possible. So that's why the bi-weekly development updates, that's why the super technical yellow paper. I think tech is something that you really don't see from a lot of the food coins. Even maybe they're copy pasting a lot of existing code. So I think coming out with a lot of proprietary technical documentation is one really important way. Obviously, conference appearances, being here in person, is another important way. To address quantitatively what you're talking about rug pulling, all of our wallets are fully transparent and visible on our site, and all of our vesting rates are not only gradual, but they're also hard-coded in using lockboxes, which are smart contracts, so that the vesting schedule, the tokens are released periodically, and so even our team can't access. We cannot rug pull. We coded that out of the equation. So you can go, anyone, again, you need to be a little technically oriented to check out those lockboxes and make sure we're not full of shit. But again, we're doing as much as we can on that end to be as transparent and honest as possible. Anyone else?
I'm interested. How did you and the whole team get connected with each other?
Yeah, so they started quite a while ago in a private Discord channel. That's how they met. Sort of just talking about, again, this Aztec Protocol, their EIP, Ethereum Improvement Protocol 1715, they were very interested in this concept of an on-chain confidential token standard. And so they sort of got together and started to put together a project or some concept, some sort of broad idea. And interesting enough, I sort of connected with them about 5 months in. So that project launched, bootstrap liquidity on Uniswap in August last year, August 2020. And I sort of connected with them in sort of like November, December to say, hey, I really like what you guys are doing. I kind of want to contribute. I have some ideas, the way you're presenting your tech. And so that's how I sort of got involved. And again, why I still don't know who they are, which is part of the way the project functions. The idea, though, for the project, I mean, if you're talking about like the concept from a bird's eye view, was just because a lot of authoritarian stuff for the last 2 to 3, 4 years has been rising immensely. And cryptography was really supposed to be, I mean, it's the heart of encryption. It's the core of encryption. Privacy is supposed to be the primary fundamental value proposition of what cryptocurrency was built on, in large part. And so we're sort of seeing that kind of, they've been in the space for quite a while. I've been here since 2017. But I think a lot of people, like OGs, so to speak, are a little bit disenchanted, not to say they don't really like DeFi, but to say that it feels like a lot of the principles and the stuff that really that seeded this space is kind of getting, again, gravitating to the back burner. Not many people are interested. That being said, is there anything else? There was something else I wanted to say to that, but it's just completely left my mind. So if there is any other question. Sweet? Okay. Right on the dot. Thank you very much again.